by narrowing it down to the Avengers, we're limiting the voice to people who weren't chosen, who elected themselves.
Yeah, the government, we can agree the government sometimes doesn't know what they're doing, right?
Yeah. I mean, most of us know that from actually having watched the movie, Zach.
Well, I couldn't remember.
Welcome to Backseat Directing,
where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
We're your hosts,
Andrew
and Aaron.
We put out new episodes every Monday and Thursday.
And on this episode, we're trying to decide, was Captain America right or Iron Man?
Let's find out. 3, 2, 1.
Action. All right, the Sokovia Accord. Whoa, boys! All right,
the giant pecs.
The Sokovia Accords were a controversial topic in Captain America: Civil War, and we have Zach here joining us on the podcast today, and Andrew, and they're going to be debating back and forth, trying to determine.
I'm a guest now on the podcast.
Was right.
There's one episode with Justin, and now I'm a guest, a guest on the podcast.
And my job is to play devil's advocate and kind of see the sides for both stories.
Yeah, moderate. Like if I have Zach in a headlock at one point, you just kind of like have a settle down.
Let him go.
I think that your moderating skills on this will probably go better than like a presidential debate, because those are always disastrous.
Hopefully. All right,
yeah,
boys.
the government, we can agree the government sometimes doesn't know what they're doing, right?
Oh yeah, we can agree on that.
Zach's coming out swinging.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that.
So, what are the Sokovia Accords?
We don't know what they say.
We don't know what they say, but they're approved by 117 countries, and it states that the Avengers shall no longer be a private organization. Instead, they'll operate under supervision of the United Nations panel only when and if that panel deems them necessary, said by Thaddeus Ross.
What's the panel?
The United Nations.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, most of us know that from actually having watched the movie, Zach.
Well, I couldn't remember if it was United States or United Nations.
Embarrassing.
Awkward. All right, guess I'm going to have to help this side out a little bit more.
No, so my stance in this debate is going to be pro Iron Man, pro Sokovia Accords. We'll each get a chance to present our argument. We're going to go back and forth. What's that called? Cross-examination? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Great.
And then Zach, what is your stance?
Hashtag Cap was right.
Cap was right. All right, was right or is right?
Is right.
Sounds like your marketing's a little off here.
My approach to this debate is going to come mainly from the 4-minute clip you can take out of the movie, the conversation that they have when the Accords are initially presented to them. And I've taken like a series of quotes from that argument, which is arguments from both sides. Lines from Captain America, lines from both Sams, lines from Iron Man, lines from Vision, and kind of like the lines that challenge and support my point. And I'm going to be like bolstering the ones that support it, and then explaining my rebuttals to their points, Cap's points that rebuff the Sokovia Accords.
Okay.
So is that where you guys want to start off, or do you want to make an opening statement?
We can start there. Yeah, I mean, their debate is kind of only a small portion of the movie, and then it leads into kind of like what happens when they disagree. But yeah, I like that as a starting point.
But basically, I can set the stage for this argument as well. So before that conversation, everything that leads up to this, I think the main factor in the MCU that kind of leads up to the Sokovia Accords are the events of Age of Ultron. So in Age of Ultron, we have Iron Man trying to put a suit of armor around the world, inadvertently creates Ultron by kind of using Jarvis's AI system and an Infinity Stone. He creates like this AI presence that revolts against its creator and wants to come after humanity. And Ultron's mission is to take this city, Sokovia, fly it into the sky, and then use it as a giant comet to pummel the Earth and destroy humanity, basically. So that, again, that's Tony Stark's creation that is creating this gigantic threat to the world, and the Avengers have to come in and stop him. In doing so, as Tony says, obviously points out that they inadvertently kill a lot of people. He said, this kid, we dropped a building on him when we were kicking ass. So the Avengers kind of hints at something that people, I think, have a lot of questions about. Like, even going as far back as the Battle of New York, everybody they show, the Avengers saves. Like, Cap jumps and covers the bomb with his shield in the train station and saves all those people. But you have to assume there's just cataclysmic death tolls going on behind the scenes with, like, what are those things called? The giant worms that fly through the air?
Yeah.
They have a term for it.
I don't know.
The scientific name.
Giant, yeah, the Chitauri giant worms that fly through the air. They're just mashing these buildings, like wrecking. I mean, Iron Man takes those people in Sokovia, he takes them out of the building in the tub, but that's like, yeah, what, he saved 3 people. We have to assume tons and tons of people are dying. So there is really no oversight to the Avengers at this point, other than S.H.I.E.L.D., which turns out to be corrupt. So the other movie that leads big into this is Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier. So
Which I think is like a big
factor
argument for Zach's side. It's like, well, look, the government can be corrupt. Look what happened to S.H.I.E.L.D. That was the governing body that was working closely with the Avengers, so.
I think that argument swings both ways. So just to dig into the argument, I think we set the stage well enough for it. But the government, yes, can be corrupt. And that is a huge problem with the government, whether it's real world or fictional. But the government is made up of people, bodies of people who, for the most part, are trained and elected by the people, even if they all have human, fallacies to them. They are representative of the people that voted to put them in that position, whereas the Avengers appointed themselves. The Avengers are just these powered beings and making their own decisions. Tony can equally be corrupt. Tony's not perfect, and he's made lots of mistakes. He creates their main villain in Age of Ultron. So they're a smaller body of unelected officials. And also, I want to point out, especially in phase 1 through 3, mostly like white Americans. Maybe not leading into some of
the Avengers.
Yeah, they're how many Avengers aren't American?
Natasha.
I mean, come on. She's like a naturalized American at that point. She's working for S.H.I.E.L.D. She's an American citizen.
It also depends on who are the Avengers. Like, there's lots of characters that aren't necessarily Avengers that are in the story. You know what I'm saying? Like, Spider-Man shows up, Black Panther shows up, and they're not Avengers yet,
Yes, but at that point in the story, we're talking about in Civil War with the Sokovia Accords, Black Panther is not an Avenger. Spider-Man also still American. So they're mostly like white Americans. There's no representation for the rest of the world.
With that, yeah.
And that's the first quote I have from this little scene in their argument in that little conference room. 117 countries want to sign this, Sam, and you're just like, nah, that's cool. We got it. So that's what War Machine says. And so you have 117 countries around the world agreeing that the Sokovia Accords are necessary and important. And I definitely don't think it's something like Vision says that can be dismissed out of hand. Mm-hmm. You've got the whole world looking at it saying, this, and that's what they said about the United Nations. They said, this is the UN. Like, this is, and yes, the UN, just like these other governing bodies that we talked about, are not perfect. But the UN is made up of a collective of people from all around the world representing multiple interests from all these countries, a diverse panel representing multiple interests, not just Americans. And they can make these decisions with the benefit of the world in mind. They're elected officials from their communities.
So you said something early on that I just want to point out. So just because an individual is elected does not mean they're trained or even necessarily qualified to do the job. Anybody can run for an election, and then anybody could win that election. But to kind of go with what you're saying, like, yeah, I definitely gonna lean into the governments can be corrupt. If the Avengers are now having to operate under the UN's guidance, you know what I'm saying? They'd then become the UN's mightiest heroes, not Earth's mightiest heroes.
But the UN is
what about the other 80 or so countries that weren't invited or didn't get to sign this UN deal? How are they represented in this? Like, so now there's another governing body making decisions that they don't have a say in. Like how does
So
that help them out?
The thing is that we can nitpick we can nitpick democracy all day long, but it's the best system that we have. That's why we use it. It's not perfect, and yes, those representative electeds you're talking about are not perfect, but if we had a better system, we would be using it. So I think that the important thing to remember is, even if they're not perfect, those elected officials are and I'm going to get to your point first and then yours, but those elected officials are the best representation we have for that body of people. And so even if they are fallible, they still represent the people who chose to vote for them. So like, that's the voice of those people. That's their way of getting themselves represented out there. So yes, that's just what we have. And if we had and by narrowing it down to the Avengers, we're limiting the voice to people who weren't chosen, who elected themselves. And then to your point, the other countries that weren't elected, we have to go with, again, the best system that we have. We have if we have the majority, if we have the UN, like the organized system of nations that's trying to make decisions for the betterment of the world, we have the majority making this decision. We have to go with the majority. That's the fairest way to do it. We can't say, we can nitpick everything all day long and then do nothing. We can say, oh, we're not representing that person way over there, and okay, so then we'll do nothing. Instead, we don't have a better option.
I think what they should have done is the governments that are wanting to sign the Sokovia Accords, what they should have done is made it like an internal law for themselves or whatever, an internal Sokovia Accords where it prohibits the Avengers from operating in their country if they don't want the Avengers to operate in their country. But to blanket and do the world, they can't operate without the say-so of the UN. Like, that turns the Avengers potentially into a weapon or I don't want to say like a policing force, but basically it turns them into
It creates kind of like an arms race as well. Like the countries that don't have the representation in that UN Sokovia Accords, like what's stopping them from creating their own version of the Avengers? And now, like, what's stopping them, like he's saying, from weaponizing them?
But that's already happening, regardless of the Sokovia Awards. It's there. So here's the next line.
No, hold on. If the UN or the United States gets into a war with a different country, what's stopping the UN from saying, okay, well, now Avengers, you operate under us, and so we the UN are telling you to go and fight this war against this other country that doesn't have enhanced individuals.
They're going to start a war with 117 countries. Don't you think they're probably in the wrong if 117 countries agree against them?
You're saying the Avengers?
No, I'm saying whatever this small country you're talking about is that the
No, not necessarily. It doesn't have to be small.
Whatever. Okay, so say
just because you're in the majority doesn't mean you're right.
Just because you're in the majority doesn't necessarily mean you're right. But the Avengers as a whole, can we agree that the Avengers are meant to help people?
Yeah.
So if they're going to help people, should they not be?
The people should have a say in how they help.
So the people should have a say in their role in society. This is the majority of people in the world. Not trying to control them.
So we can also like separate it too. Like, let's say the Sokovia Accords weren't necessarily presented, but do we agree or disagree with the fact that like the Avengers need to have some sort of checks and balances in place to where they're not just operating as independent military people?
I think
like maybe the Sokovia Accords is not the answer, but Zach, do you think that superheroes should be underneath some sort of governing body or some sort of organization or something that's keeping these balances in check?
Which they were.
So I think my answer is no, because the purpose of superheroes is to operate outside of the law. Being a superhero in and of itself is like, normally illegal. Like, vigilantism is illegal, but in these fictitious worlds, necessary. So I think that the Avengers are necessary, and they shouldn't necessarily have somebody who dictates their actions. What their governing body should be is their morality. These are the good guys.
But is it not arrogant for Captain America to decide that his morality is the morality for the entire world. Like
that's what I'm saying is if these other countries feel that they don't want the Avengers to potentially operate in their countries, then they should prohibit that. You know, it would be like
so what if there's a situation where their government is militarizing and starting World War III. Like if you had the Avengers in the time of World War II and you had the power to send the Avengers over to Nazi Germany and stop what they were doing, would that not be the right choice?
It would be, but the government doesn't always make the right choice. That's what Captain America says. He says,
but
what if we need to go somewhere and they don't let us?
But you're saying that if Adolf Hitler had banded together and said, "We don't want
Captain
the
America
Avengers."
was around.
I mean, I was deep into that sentence.
Go ahead.
If Adolf Hitler had banded with, German officials and said, "We don't want the Avengers to operate on this soil," then they shouldn't have been able to go over there and stop him.
Yeah, well, okay, but what you're saying is kind of like, yeah, what I'm saying. But if it's blanketed, right, then the same thing is happening. Like, okay, if Germany says that they can't go over there, that's basically the same thing as saying that the UN is saying that they can't go over there. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, but it would be up to a majority. So Germany would be one country amongst 117 countries if they were in the UN at that time, and which didn't exist.
I think that I would like to think, hopefully,
I think that's why it was invented.
that they would have voted to send the Avengers in to stop something like that. But I think Captain America is right in saying that we can't like put our fate in their hands, because what if there's something we have to do and they don't let us?
So Captain America has a line, let me find it in here, where he said, we may not be perfect, but can't find it, but I'm going by memory.
Yeah.
He said, we may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own. Now, just imagine that same line being said by a gun owner after a school shooting, which I feel like is the same position he's in. They just blew up a building in this foreign country and killed a bunch of people. Not Wanda's fault, not her intention. She made a mistake. She is not perfect. But they should be subject to some kind of analysis and repercussion of a decision of where they should be sent. And then, okay, if you're ineffective, you can be removed from this position. They should be subject to some kind of analysis. So if he's basically fighting additional checks and balances, like if there was a school shooting and then the next day said, all right, we need stricter gun laws. And then Captain America said, we may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own. We need guns to fight guns. That's the stance that Captain America's taking.
But you're completely changing the circumstances. You could take any line and twist it that way. I mean, that's completely twisting it. Like, that's something.
How do you see that line?
Huh?
How do you see that line being represented?
Well, like, I think the way that Captain America is saying is the context we should be taking it in. We can't just change the context.
Well, they mishandled they mishandled a weapon and people died, and he's saying the safest hands are still our own. If you were a gun owner and you accidentally shot the kid across the street, and then somebody take the school shooting out of the equation, you accidentally fired your gun in your home, it went through the wall and killed the kid across the street, and then would you still say the safest hands are still our own? You mishandled a very valuable weapon. He's denying oversight to that.
So what you're saying right now is that there should be some type of consequences for actions that lead to somebody's death.
Not just consequences.
And I agree.
Oversight, checks and balances. They should have someone that they
were in a country that no one knew they were in. Like, they entered this country without going through customs and stuff. Like, you can't do that. There's, like Andrew's saying, there's checks and balances to these things. They're illegally in a country, and then on top of that, they killed people, even though it wasn't their intention. But that's what ended up happening. So,
I mean, that essentially happens. Like, I mean, sometimes there's secret military forces that are going into countries.
Start a war. These American citizens are going over to another country, and the business that they were conducting ended up killing people.
Yeah, and let's just acknowledge the fact that the Avengers are specifically American. Even if they have members, even if Wanda is not American, she's from Sokovia, they are based out of America, operating, their base operations on American soils. They're majority American. They're taking American objectives and and allegiances into account when they make their decisions primarily.
You're saying the Avengers are?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
Do you think that I think that they're not so much a force for global good in the opening of Civil War. They are moralistic. They want to do the best for the best people, but at the end of the day, they are allegiant to America.
I mean, Aaron and I were kind of talking about this, but you can look at
Captain America has an American flag on his shield.
you can look at I mean, yeah, they are. I'm not saying they're not based in America and operate out of America, but I think that they are operating in what to them is the greater good. Like they in Age of Ultron in the opening, they're going around and shutting down, arms dealers and shutting down Hydra, which is Nazis. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily. I don't think. But you could look at it from Hydra's point of view, and the Avengers are the bad guys.
I think that
I think as a society, most people would agree that shutting down the Nazis is
I think
a greater good cause.
I think that Rhodey calls Cap, I think he's accurate in calling Captain America dangerously arrogant, because Cap is deciding, much like America has done throughout all of history, that his view of right and wrong is the right answer for the entire world. He's deciding that unilaterally. I mean, not that he's not usually right. Love the guy. He's makes great decisions, but that can't work for forever.
not anyone can just be like, oh, well, I killed these people because it was for the greater good, and maybe 10 out of the 15 people that person ended up killing were bad guys, but what about the 5 that weren't? Like, they made a judgment mistake. Like you can't just have anyone going out there making that decision without laws and a process in place.
Yeah, well, they're not just anyone, they're the Avengers.
I know, but the Avengers are in this case just anyone. They're not operating under any sort of law at all.
There's a lot more good points in that I haven't gotten to in these quotes I want to touch on. So Vision says, during the 8 years since Mr. Stark announced himself as Iron Man, the number of known enhanced person has grown exponentially, and during the same period, the number of potentially world-ending events has risen at a commensurate rate. And he follows that up by saying, our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict. Conflict breeds catastrophe. Oversight is not an idea that can be dismissed out of hand. So that goes back to the point that you mentioned earlier, where having this group could cause fringe groups to create their. I mean, that's already happening. They already created Wanda and Pietro as weapons against the Avengers with the Mind Stone. Mm-hmm. I mean,
even Whiplash.
Yeah, this is happening regardless of whether they are supported by the UN or not.
So first of all, I think that's like. This conversation in the movie, I just love the way that it plays out, and everyone delivers their lines and the ideologies that are being expressed from the different Avengers. It gives them like not just, oh, look at these badass superheroes, but like it gives them like a kind of more human characteristics. But
I think that Black Widow steps in at the end too and makes like the actual best points, which like I wasn't suspecting, because she, like, they point out to her, they're like, aren't you the girl that just told the government to go screw itself? And she steps in and makes like the best points for my argument at the end, which I'll get to. So
anyways, what I was going to say to that though is like, I forget the like fancy term for it, but it's essentially like a coincidence. You know what I'm saying? Like, while Iron Man revealing himself, and then these things are increasing, doesn't necessarily mean it's because Iron Man revealed himself. Now,
it's correlation versus causation.
Right. Yeah. So and with some of the instances, of course, it's because of how Tony Stark's operating, specifically with Ultron. But like, Hydra's always been there,
specifically with all of his villains.
Well, yeah,
literally everyone.
That is pretty true with Iron Man. But like Hydra, for example, has been operating long before Tony Stark revealed himself. And they're getting to where they're more powerful, to where they can cause these potentially world-ending catastrophes. So, like, yes, some of them. So in some cases, these threats do exist because the Avengers are around. And their whatever it is, their power does invite conflict. But at the same time, there's going to be instances where, for example, Thanos has always been on a hunt for the Infinity Stones. So he would have gotten the Infinity Stones at, probably quicker than he did than if the Avengers were around. And then when he used them, there would have been nobody to go back and stop him because the Avengers wouldn't have been around, So
I think there's a
yes and no to that. I mean,
I think there's a good point to be made in what if Thanos arrived at Wakanda and the Avengers just didn't have time to get approval for everything they needed to do to move from the US to Wakanda to make all. I think that there's a good point in that for going against the UN being able to make decisions for them. But I would say that even though decisions will probably be made slower, the Avengers can still operate really similarly to how they do now. We've seen.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, finish.
We've seen in this world how Nick Fury just flat out does what he wants to do, and he is fine. Like when they're ordering the nuke on New York City, he says, "I acknowledge the council's decision, but I see that it is a stupid ass decision, so I will not be doing that." And then he goes so far as to fire a missile launcher at the first plane that they send off. Who's the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the next movie? Nick Fury.
Yeah.
So I think that while this is in name, the Sokovia Accords is just it's kind of a backdrop or a foundation for them to start from. And if they have to go and do something and get the job done, it'll still be subject to review afterwards, which is what I think is important.
Okay, and I can, and that's different. That's different than that. We don't know specifically what the Sokovia Accords say, and if that's how it's operating, like I can live with that. And yeah, I agree. There should probably be some review of the mission and somebody looking into things, right? But that's different than having it be a before the fact thing. You can't. You're stopping them from potentially like saving the world.
But can you not also agree that Cap is being in the wrong in the situation because he's essentially just breaking the band up, and when he could have taken the time to actually see how the Sokovia Accords took effect? Because if he waits a month and sees if the Sokovia Accords are actually affecting them negatively and then does the same thing and breaks off from the band, the consequences are still the same as if he does it now. He's just immediately destroying the group.
I mean, they are both reacting emotionally. Like
Iron Man's trying to keep them together.
Okay, that doesn't make him right though. Like Iron Man is, like you said, coming off the back of Age of Ultron, where he is directly responsible for Ultron and all the people that died as a result of that. So he's probably feeling some type of guilt and that's why he's ready to sign, because he's guilty.
Cap's response to that guilt is like, if someone dies on your watch, you don't give up. His response is like, we just keep going.
Captain America's a soldier.
Yeah, hopefully we make the right decision next time.
That kid wasn't a soldier. He was a student on break building houses for the poor.
Right.
He didn't sign up for that. You can't treat him like he's another soldier who died in battle. And Tony's guilt is totally warranted. I think he laces it with a lot of rational, logical thinking, because he has a line where he says that if we don't make this decision, it'll be made for us, and that won't be pretty. And he's right. Like the government's saying, this is what you need to do. And Cap's just choosing to become a fugitive from the law right away. He's out of the drop of a hat.
So Captain America doesn't choose to become a fugitive. He's not making that decision. The decision is, do they sign or do they not sign? We, again, don't know what the Sokovia Accords say. So does he become a fugitive for not signing?
He becomes a fugitive for breaking Bucky out of that secure facility, breaking the law.
I think we have to move ourselves away from Sokovia Accords just a little bit. Should they be under a governing body or should they not? Because you're right, we don't know all the details, but that can't just be your only reason of why we can't sign these accords.
Well, we have to assume a lot of things. We don't. I agree.
We have to assume based off what Cap is saying, his negative. We have to assume his negative side to be true, because I feel like no one really contests him on the fact what if they don't want it? What if they want to send us somewhere we don't go? Yeah. Nobody's really they're going to send us everywhere we want to.
Right? Yeah.
So I think
it's hard to go off of something that we don't really know all the details of.
I see what you're saying.
Because who knows what it says?
That's why I'm
it could
saying,
say that there's no oversight. We don't know.
That's why I'm saying, do you think that these superheroes, any superheroes, should be under a governing body, or should they just be able to act on their own?
I think
that's the argument here.
He said you said already.
I think that in the case of the Avengers, since they are so much of like a public figure team, that their missions should be subject to review, and potentially have consequences based on the contents of the mission.
Got him.
But
this is where Tony says
that's different than saying don't allow them to operate.
So you think they should be able to do with whatever they please and then be reviewed
consequences
afterwards?
Potentially. Not you. I mean, whatever they please is a negative connotation.
I feel like that's kind of how it is, though, because they did whatever they want. They were a fugitive, and now half the team got arrested. So that's kind of where we're at already.
Yeah, I mean you're referring to Ant-Man and Clint being arrested.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that
I said Ant-Man.
Sam got arrested.
Yeah.
Too.
I don't necessarily think that they should have been arrested in that scenario. What are they being arrested for? For assaulting Iron Man. I'm sure Iron Man wouldn't have pressed those charges.
You could. I mean, if they're breaking the law by breaking out,
they aided and abetted Captain
Yeah.
America and breaking the law.
Aiding and abetting a fugitive. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So,
And property destruction. I mean, they destroyed the whole airport.
well, all of them did.
Yeah.
So,
Here.
you were about to say another quote.
Yeah, I want to get back to these quotes to get on track. So, which one are we up to? Iron Man says, "We need to be put in check, whatever form that takes. I'm game. If we can't accept limitations, we're boundaryless. We're no better than the bad guys." I think that's a really good point. That if they're not subject to some form of control, then what's the difference between them and just doing whatever they want?
All right. So I hear what you're saying. I think, again, kind of like I said earlier, I think their boundaries, their control is themselves. Like, these guys are the good guys, they're doing what's right. I mean, they're not perfect, and yeah, people die, but in these instances, more people, I mean, mine is Sokovia because, again, that's directly Iron Man specifically's fault.
And Bruce Banner. Let's
Spread the
a
blame.
little bit of blame on it, too.
a little bit of Bruce Banner blame, but now I've lost my train of thought. But basically, what I'm saying is, they're doing what's good. They're doing the right thing, and yes, it's sad and unfortunate that people are dying, but they're protecting more people than are dying.
But doing the right thing, I mean, if Iron Man,
Loki would have invaded no matter what, and then what? They're Earth subjugated.
would Ultron have?
No, but I already said that's Iron Man's fault.
Yeah, he's one of the Avengers, so
then he should face the consequences. Why does the whole team have to be?
Well, why does it just have to be about consequences after the fact? What if we could prevent these events from happening?
Yeah, then we should prevent them. But
And how do you think we would be able to prevent them if it wasn't for a governing body?
most of the instances are probably not preventable. Like I said, Loki could not have been prevented by the government signing some document. He was coming no matter what.
The government would have, and they did, because at the time it was S.H.I.E.L.D. They sent the Avengers in right away, even as a brand new team. So I think that the UN would, in my opinion, operate in a similar way. When there's an alien threat that is just a threat to society, why would they not just send the Avengers in? What Cap would maybe be worried about is local squabbles between governments. That's something he didn't want to be involved in anyway. In Captain America 2, Winter Soldier, he didn't want to be involved in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s dirty work. So
I think that he's worried about the Avengers being politicized or chained. They can't.
it's a good line. He says that it's still run by people. People have agendas, and agendas change.
Yeah. So
why are the Avengers above all other people? Why don't they have agendas that change? What is he like? He thinks they're perfect?
I mean, I don't necessarily think he thinks they're perfect, but their agenda is unchanging. Their agenda is to protect people, protect the world, and stop the bad guys. you know, I mean, if I mean, we'll probably see this here in the near future with the MCU, but with Secret Invasion, you know, the Skrulls are going to be probably put in power or something, or a bad guy's going to probably be put in power, and then that agenda changes. So if the Avengers now have to, you know, by law follow this corrupt individual's new agenda,
Why are we assuming they're corrupt?
we're assuming a lot of things. Why are we assuming they're good? You know,
I'm not assuming they're good. I'm assuming they're representative of the people that elected them.
but I'm saying is we have Skrulls in the MCU, so that Skrull could just replace the president, and then now the Skrull looks like the president, but is pushing the United States or the world in a different direction. So then the Avengers would be subject to following that new agenda.
I feel like the Avengers will be able to determine too, like there's got to be like a failsafe in this kind of agreement too, to where it's like, okay, this is deemed corrupt, and it's through these processes that this is deemed corrupt.
Again, the point of the 117 countries, the Skrulls would have to, this is another thing that makes the Avengers even more foolproof is this plan, because the Avengers navigating within themselves could be corrupted as a group of 10 a lot easier than the entire government system of 117 countries. Now, like, even to just get the majority in there, you'd have to get what? Almost 60 countries. So if the president of the US was taken over, he'd be in a lot more control and influence of the Avengers now than if they were beholden to the UN, because all of the investment that the Avengers have in the US and allegiance they have to the US government and SHIELD up until the point of its disbandment. I think it's all the more helpful. But you had a point that I wanted to tie into this Black Widow line as well. So she says, we've had some very public mistakes. We have to win their trust back. And I think in this instance, she's kind of talking about the government, but I think it can also lend to like the people. I don't remember what exactly you said that made me think of this, but it ties back to a point that you already made. The Avengers. So imagine you're watching the Avengers from like the ground level. Like you're a waiter, waitress in middle America. You see like these all powerful beings on the news. They are more of a concept to you than a reality. And you think in your heart of hearts, they're going and saving people and doing the right thing. But also maybe you have some reservations and fears surrounding all the power they hold. And then one day it's on the news that we're presenting these Sokovia Accords to the Avengers, where they will be subject to oversight by 117 countries across the globe trying to decide what is best for their actions. And then you see on the news, Avengers have refused the Sokovia Accords, choose to operate as independent contractors and do not whatever they please, and operate based on their own best moral guidelines. As somebody who has never met the Avengers and sees them more as a concept, would you not be afraid of the concept of these powerful people refusing? She's talking about winning their trust back. I think that after seeing like a bunch of innocent people die in an explosion in this foreign country at the beginning of Civil War, just the average person would be a lot comforted by seeing some oversight and control to this massively powerful force.
Potentially, but at the same time, like in a real world example, the government decided that they were going to drop, atomic bombs on citizens in Japan. They didn't ask the people's permission. They decided that that was the best call. And I know that if I was alive then and they asked people to vote, I would not vote to drop an atomic bomb on citizens and kids. You know what I'm saying? Like the government is gonna do what's best for the country,
Government gonna
in
do
their
what
opinion.
Government gonna
or
do.
whoever is in charge at the time. So I don't know, man. It's definitely a complicated issue. But if I'm a person and I see that these people are, defending good, I think that, right now in the real world, or I guess years ago, but if the United States goes to a war, right, the military, there's collateral damage, and citizens die, and it's sad, but we can't, we don't demonize the soldiers because there's collateral damage. You know what I'm saying?
But I think there's a lot more responsibility when you have the power that the Avengers have. Like when you have the power to kick somebody straight through their chest, or to like when you're Vision and you could just obliterate an entire city. I think that there's a lot more that goes into judging somebody with that much. I mean, so for example, like, have you seen Con Air?
No, but real quick, just talking about immense power. Like in the real world, certain countries have the ability to wipe places completely off the map in a matter of like seconds. And that is like, you know what I'm saying? Like
It's
they
also
have this
not
huge
it's
amount
also
of power.
not up to one
person or a very small group of people either.
I mean, that's not true. It is in some instances.
I mean, I think in the instance that you mentioned, in the instance of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the president made that decision. I'm sure it was also made across the entire cabinet, across multiple people's input and, generals' input and things like that. But also millions of people voted to elect our president at the time. Millions of people elected him, trusting his judgment to do that. Nobody elected the Avengers to go and use their immense power. They through happenstance or through some government project were a regular person who was chosen by one guy. Tommy Lee Jones didn't even agree with him for the choice. So one person put their faith in Steve Rogers, and now he has all this power and influence over a group of people that are each in their own, like, could be like huge threats to nations.
At the same time, though, like, yeah, there's not a formal election for the Avengers, but the Avengers themselves basically elected Captain America as the leader. You know what I'm saying? Like
6 people.
Yeah,
but he was
78 billion.
I think the other point I was trying to make too is when I brought up the movie Con Air, which might sound way out of left field. In that movie, and I don't know about the accuracy of this, but I could see it playing out in a realistic courtroom. He is a trained military official, or he's a trained military person. Mm-hmm. He's got crazy skills. A person attacks him outside at a bar, initiates the fight. He kills that person with their knife, and then he goes to jail because of the fact that basically his training makes him a deadly threat, and he had the capability to disarm that situation without like mortal violence, and he chose not to. So like the Avengers kind of have that responsibility on them, even if that's not like a true legal document. I think the point still stands that they have the responsibility of, you have the ability of superhuman powers, you have to be treated as though you're held to a higher standard. And
I agree, and it's not like they're choosing to have these people die.
But it also can't be like, whoops, we killed 50 people.
In most instances, they're not doing the killing. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's a causation of the situation that they're in.
And I'm not blaming them for whatever outside force comes in. I'm not using that like that conflict breeds catastrophe. I'm not saying that it's their fault that these forces come, but I'm saying that there should be some oversight to how far can they take it, to what level of minutia can they come down and get involved in some other country, like Crossbones. I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I thought I mixed up his name. Crossbones versus Loki. I mean, one's easy, like, yeah, get in there, team. Get off the bench. It's a little different.
I have a few questions for you, Andrew, and your position on this. So, like, the 3 points of what I can think of why maybe a governing body isn't the best idea is a few of them we've touched on, but maybe we can elaborate a little more. But the first one is like just slow decision making. Like, how do you get 117 people in a room fast enough or on a Zoom call fast enough and have them talk about the problem at hand and come to an agreement quick enough to stop something that's happening? And then Zach's touched on this too. Like, what about corruption? I feel like that's a big one. I think corruption could cause a problem even if the corruption isn't the majority of the panel. And then the third one is, what qualifies something as worthy for the Avengers to go and fight and save and to suit up? Like how is that determined? You know, like if there is some bad guy in New York, like why are the other 116 countries going to come in and be like, oh yeah, you should stop him? You know, like how do you determine that?
I think that there's no, I know that we've been doing a lot of kind of subjective guessing at what the Soviet Accords might have said specifically, but there is no realistic way that the Sokovia Accords say that the Avengers can only go in when 117 countries vote and decide that they can go in, because then the Avengers would essentially be doing nothing. They'd be doing cleanup. There's no time to get 117 people in a room and make a decision. I think that the basis of the 117 people being involved is, I think that statement that Cap's making is more about the Sokovia Accords are going to get together and decide on rules and regulations for the Avengers. And if they tell the Avengers you can't operate on foreign soil, then at the end of the day, although, you know, the Avengers might not be as effective, those countries, the majority of those countries for that decision to be made would be saying, we don't want your help. And if they say, we don't want your help, and then they come there anyway, and then people die, like in the case of the beginning of Civil War, now you have a huge international incident on your hands where they have refused your help. You've decided we're going to force you to take our help, and then you've made the situation worse, which I think ultimately is what's important here. I mean, what points am I missing here from your questions?
That was good. I liked how you, before we move on, I liked how you said that the 117 countries are not necessarily dictating every move, but they're coming up with the rules in which they have to execute their actions.
We have to imagine too that these countries they exist in this world where New York has been decimated by an alien invasion from the Chitauri. They're not gonna, how could they say, we never want the Avengers over here? They're going to say, we want the Avengers over here in these specific circumstances.
I just want to say,
it's going to limit them. But like Tony said, if they're limitless or boundaryless, then they're just chaos. They're, you know, chaotic good. Like they're basically a step away from
how do you separate a good guy from a bad guy if both of them can just break the law at any time?
The big point about really anything in life that we can take away is that it's all about perspective. Mm-hmm. And, you know, from the other side of a lot of countries, we're the bad guys as America. So that's why we have to try to get as many voices and as many diverse voices in the room for these rules and regulations as possible.
I was just going to say that we're doing a lot of assuming right now. Like, you know, I mean, I get that's going to be part of this argument just because this is not real and we don't really have a lot to go off of. But even assuming that not 117 countries have to be, you know, involved in all the decisions, that's an assumption. We don't know.
But how are we thinking logistically that 117 countries are going to get together to decide that the Avengers can lift a finger? What situations would they even be sending them to?
I don't know. Thanos.
They'd be sending them to last week's news.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's what Captain America is saying, is that can't be how they operate.
What are some of your assumptions that would go towards your side of the argument? Like, it's not like we're the only, or this side, like Iron Man's side, the government side, like, we're not the only ones making assumptions. Like, you can make assumptions too.
Well,
like,
realistically, with my side of the argument, there's no assumptions needed because the Avengers would operate how they normally operate, how they've been operating. We know that if Thanos invades, that they're going to go to that. They're going to go and stop the bad guy wherever the evil is.
How do we even know for sure that they're going to go though?
Because they did.
What if they made other plans? What if they're all, you know how they're all off-world killing Thanos? What happens when a world-ending threat happens then?
I'm talking about...
Did they make the decision to leave anybody behind in that instance?
I don't know.
Who was defending Earth while they flew all the way across the galaxy to the
Andrew, don't forget about like your B tier super.
Daredevil wasn't there.
The ground level
Netflix. If Daredevil exists in that world already.
Nah, but to jump back real quick to in the first Avengers movie, the government, like you said, decides to drop a nuke on its own New York City. It's not like they're dropping it in the middle of, you know, somewhere, I don't know, some desert or something in the United States. They're dropping it on like probably the most populated, most dense population in the United States, and they're just making that decision to drop a nuke. And thank God the Avengers were there to stop that. You know what I'm saying?
And yes, the government can be corrupt. That's why we're putting so many different voices into this. That's why we're using the entire UN. I mean, it's like I said, it's the best system we have. I don't think it's perfect. I think a lot of times it's shitty. But if we, like I said, if we had a better system, you bet your ass we'd be using it already.
I think if you have the system in place, what's to say that the superheroes can't just go do what they think is best anyways?
Which I think is something that Zach would agree with.
You know, like, all right, let's sign this. Let's make sure that we're trying our best to work within the system. We're not above the law here, because if we were, we're no better than the bad guys. But if you wholeheartedly don't agree, or maybe you heard of something going on over here, like, you just go do it.
See, I think that makes a lot of sense. But if that's a possibility, and this is something I don't want to believe about Cap, but is Cap not a complete ass for not going with that if that is a route they can go? I mean, that's the only thing that makes me think that it wasn't that route, because I feel like Cap would have been on board for that.
Yeah, like at the time, right now, signing this agreement could be the best for everyone, but that doesn't mean that like his hands are tied.
But we don't know. It might mean that. We don't know.
Well, his hands aren't going to be physically tied. He can go do what he still thinks is best, but at least there's some sort of checks and balances in place, or consequences after the fact, to help govern his decisions.
Would you argue that he could do more good as Nomad, as a free agent, than he could do as a member of the Avengers with limitations?
I mean, it's kind of a tough, like, what access does he have as Nomad? Like,
say he has access to the Avengers he has access to in the movies.
Okay, well, when he's Nomad, he's working with Wakanda. So he still has the transportation, he still has backup. Like, I think he could do more good as Nomad than as Captain America with limitations, because with limitations, he's limited, and the actions that he can conduct. As Nomad, if the job needs to be done, he can go and do it.
I mean, if there's a world-ending threat and the Avengers are going to it, I mean, they've got the A-tier Avengers on Iron Man's side. They've got like Vision, and then Cap's going to show up there and try to help, and they're going to arrest him.
Well, Captain America's team won.
He's gonna have to work behind the scenes, doing the way he's decided to go.
Captain America's team beat the A-list Avengers in the fight.
Yeah, because Iron Man's team wasn't trying to kill them.
Captain America team wasn't trying to kill him either.
Well, Sam accidentally got Rhodey paralyzed, so
that was Vision.
That was Vision because of Sam. Should have taken that hit to the back.
Should have just let him shoot him. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know.
But now we're just throwing blame wherever we want.
But the only reason that they were in that pursuit in the first place was because of Cap's decision. So that's why he got hurt.
They were in that position because Tony Stark created a killer robot that murdered people.
Yeah, but Captain America's refusing to accept
and Iron Man decided to do that on his own. No one asked for the world to be encased by this suit of protection.
Iron Man didn't ask the Avengers. He didn't consult the team.
What do you say when you're on a team, though? You accept the highs and lows.
We win and lose as a team.
You win and lose as a team. And Cap is refusing to accept. Cap's not saying, all right, get Tony out of here. Cap is defending Tony and keeping him on the team, but also saying the team should not invite any consequences to their actions.
He never says that. He never says we shouldn't face any consequences.
He's not accepting the consequence. You can't choose your own consequences.
I don't know, man.
He's like, nope, try again. Try round 2. I don't like this.
I see what you're saying. I do see what you're saying, but like, would Batman ever sign the Sokovia Accords? You know?
No, absolutely not.
Exactly.
Absolutely not.
Exactly. And
doesn't mean that.
But is Batman in the right?
Batman is always in the right.
I would.
It's his superpower.
I would respect Batman for making that decision too, but it doesn't mean that it's the right decision. I mean, I like superheroes like working outside the law. And I think it's awesome the way that they're vigilantes and they have to be, they have to do things that maybe in these fictional universes the justice system can't do. But realistically, it's kind of fucked up.
I think that the Avengers in the MCU are such public figures. Like, I think almost every Avenger, everybody knows who they are, So I think maybe that adds to the sense of a need for something like this. But if the Avengers were operating in the shadows, like, it maybe wouldn't be as, like,
Prominent
in your face,
issue.
you know what I'm saying? Because, I mean, even if, and so in the comic books, I don't know what it's called, but basically the Sokovia Accords in Civil War of the comic books basically want all the
hero
enhanced individuals to be able...
Hero Registration Act, right?
Right, yeah, I think that's what it's called. They have to be basically unmasked. The government has to know their name, their powers, and all of that stuff. So it's like...
It's a better argument against it in the comics because you're putting all these people's families at risk.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're arguing in the movie Civil War, they've all elected to do that of their own free will. They're just they're just like, the government's coming and knocking on the Avengers door and they said, hey, we got this group of people that all agrees that you guys could use some checks and balances. And we'd really like you to accept that. And Captain America said, get out of my house.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think that Cap is... I still think he's right because
I think he's thinking way more emotionally. Tony's taking emotional information through a funnel and making logical decisions based off the emotional information. Cap is making emotional decisions based off of emotional information.
I think that I think they're both reacting emotionally, and it's no secret that Tony Stark is smarter than Captain America. But so I don't know. It just doesn't feel like. To me, at least, it doesn't feel like Tony Stark is thinking straight. You know what I'm saying? We already know throughout the MCU that Tony Stark has like struggles kind of with his mental health, and there's like hints of him in his drinking problems, and he's got the PTSD and he gets anxiety and stuff like that. So like he's reacting emotionally.
So people with mental health problems can't make the right decision, huh?
That's not what I said. I'm just saying that
just calling him into question.
He might not be thinking clearly
for having PTSD.
You're making it sound like he's clear-eyed and has really thought everything through, and I don't think he has. You know what I'm saying? He's reacting to, got to keep the team together.
Let's acknowledge the point, too, that when they're all talking in the scene that we've been referencing the whole time, Tony is silent. They have to actually ask for his opinion. Nat says, Tony, you've been uncharacteristically quiet this whole time. Mm-hmm. So what's he been doing? He's been sitting there listening to everyone's opinion in the room while everyone else had word vomit and blurted out what they had to say. Tony is acting like a real leader and listening to what everyone has to say, listening to their points before he speaks. He has to be asked to speak. And then he steps up and gives a logical basis for his decisions. That's not just kind of like this moral, philosophical BS. He's like, we need to be put in check for this reason. This is the evidence in the past. This is what we've done wrong. Here's what... I think he's being very logical.
Captain America's being logical too.
Yeah.
He's not reacting... I mean, like I said, they both are reacting emotionally. But it's not like Captain America's like just some pie-in-the-sky idea. It's a realistic possibility that something comes up that the Avengers need to take care of, and the Sokovia Accords prohibit them from taking care of that. That's a logical progression of his.
It makes it hard to
argument as
side.
well.
It makes it hard to side with the Sokovia Accords when Captain America keeps ending up being right. Like he in the beginning, they all think that Bucky set off that bomb at the UN meeting, and it wasn't Bucky. And now the government is going after Bucky with lethal force. And then also Captain America was right that there was more corruption where Zemo got in and
Zemo
got in and corrupted Bucky. To where he went back to, so like
Zemo corrupted the Avengers. That's his point of controlling Iron Man, manipulating Cap versus Iron Man is a point for oversight for them, in my opinion.
I think Zemo is honestly probably the best villain in the MCU because he was so effective. You know, he was so effective in kind of
breaking
off
everything
these
up.
events. He broke the Avengers up like almost basically single-handedly. You know.
I think him or the Skrulls would have an easier time, as we've seen in the MCU, manipulating the Avengers than manipulating that many countries. I mean, also, can you blame the government for going after Bucky the way they did when they had every reason to believe? I mean, they had like a picture that was like, they had like video footage that looked like him leaving. And I think they're not necessarily going after him with lethal force. They're going after him hard and fast, like you would need to go after a Captain America level threat. And then maybe they respond more aggressively when when Cap and Bucky start literally just kicking them down flights of stairs.
What happens though if the government would have killed Bucky right then? Like they're killing. I mean, I was going to say an innocent man, but
Tough to say.
He's not. He's not innocent, but at the same time, it's like
he's also brainwashed.
He was brainwashed, so it's like
he is innocent.
A gray area, but. They would have killed him an innocent person.
But they would have killed him for, and God, I hate to sound like this kind of person, but they would have killed him for fighting back against them. Like if he just trusted due process to take its course, he knows the Avengers, he should know. I don't know what state he's in at that point, but he's going to have due process. Like when they do catch up to him, they lock him down. They put cuffs on him. Like they were going to come to that apartment to arrest him before they start making their great escape.
That is kind of a naive way to look at it though. I mean, you can hope and pray that there's going to be due process and it's all going to shake out the right way.
Idealistic thought process is the bed and breakfast of your boy, dude.
In real life though, there's people get wrongfully convicted. Some people are scapegoats. You know, they might lock somebody up.
Does that mean we shouldn't have laws?
Does that mean we rebel against?
No, I'm not saying that. But you're saying just hope and pray that these things work out.
I've said again and again. What do you suggest we do if we don't go with the best system that we have?
If there's a law that is oppressive, right? Sometimes laws sometimes laws do need to be broken. Like it was illegal for certain people to vote, and people broke laws to get the awareness.
There were two schools of thought on that, though. There's people who broke laws, and there's people who peacefully protested as well.
I don't know.
I mean, I just don't think. Yes, I agree. Sometimes laws need to be broken. Yes, there are oppressive laws, and in a situation like that, screw the laws. That's ridiculous. But in this specific situation, in this fictional world that we're talking about, I mean, what laws are we talking about breaking? We're talking about fighting the government, physically assaulting officers of the law,
entering foreign countries illegally.
It's like evading arrests. Like we're talking about some serious stuff where people are like really getting hurt.
Yeah, we are.
It looks badass. It looks awesome. But like Tony said, people are getting hurt and dying while we're kicking ass. Like that's just.
I love the delivery of that line. But
I think something that we haven't brought up yet that is an important part towards this whole like check and balances thing that we keep talking about is if we have these checks and balances in place, we can also have training in place to where we can train these heroes to go through these certain steps and to know
minimize
how to perform in the field to clear them through a mental screening as well. That way Iron Man's not going out there when he is at his peak PTSD and we can send someone else instead. Like if we have that training and stuff beforehand, helping them make the best decisions possible while they're out on the field, like you have to agree that that's a good idea, right? Like not just anyone can go out there and fight because I have a superpower or I made a super machine. Like if I made a weapon right now and I go out there and just fight because I want to, like what's keeping everything balanced? What's keeping everything checked? What's making sure that I'm not doing anything?
What's the difference between you and me?
Yeah.
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't disagree that training is a good idea. Like yeah, some of these people are civilians, like who maybe don't have all the answers.
Some of them are 16, 17-year-old boys swinging through the city.
Some of them are actual criminals.
Yeah. Reformed. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, but I mean, that's, again, we're assuming that that's what's going to happen. Like,
well, that's why I keep bringing it back to where, like, we should argue the fact, like, should there be a governing body or should there not? Should they act on their own?
I don't even think necessarily governing body. I think what we're talking about is like regulation versus Cap is rebelling against regulation.
Yes.
Cap thinks that it's an impediment rather than a benefit.
At least where there's like, because right now any act of superheroism is against the law.
Is regulation worth it if it slows down the response? And I would say yes.
I mean, probably in most cases, it would probably be yes. But what about the times that the answer is no?
Well, you
Then
just
they
said
just make that decision to not follow the rules there.
Even that point aside, you said in most cases, yes. We have to choose a decision that benefits the most people the most amount of times. We have to go with the most cases.
But that is assuming that, like, utilitarianism is the proper, like, ethical path, which maybe it is, but maybe it's not, you know? Like, there's other ways to think about what good is or what the right thing to do is, you know? It's not just black and white. That this argument is like, it's not something that is a fact. So there's not a true correct answer. You know, it's up for interpretation. And the way that I interpret it is like, I think that I put my faith in Captain America to make the right decisions and the right choices and do things with good intent.
Okay. And what would you say if Captain America made a decision you didn't agree with?
That would never happen. No, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. It's definitely possible.
What if someone like equally as powerful but not as morally correct was in this situation? Would you still trust them to make the right decision?
Captain America's gone now.
Yeah, he is. RP. He's still alive. He's on the moon.
So someone else has to be making those decisions.
So Sam Wilson, Captain America's still around. Anyways, I think that in these, fictitious worlds that we immerse ourselves in, there's kind of like three categories of like characters, right? You have good guys, you have bad guys, and then you have like the anti-heroes, right? And that should be kind of what our decisions are based on. You know what I'm saying? Like Captain America wouldn't make the choice to just kill somebody. You know what I'm saying? And if there's a character like the Red Hood who is deciding to just flat out murder people, that's different than somebody dying because of like the superheroes trying to stop a threat or stop the end of the world, you know?
Yeah, I think that we've both made some good points, and I think that this argument could go on and on and on.
I agree.
I think it could go on and on and on without going anywhere.
Because
it's hard to make any ground because it's
all hypothetical.
It's based in it's hypothetical.
But conceptually, it's still a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what do you, Aaron? Before we close out, what did you see as strengths and weaknesses of our arguments?
Yeah, I kind of pointed out like the pros to letting the hero decide, like the decision making of the UN, the corruption that could be going on within these different countries, or even the weaponization of these heroes or teams.
But I would argue that diversification is the best defense against corruption, and that
He asked me
a quality response is better. A quality response is sometimes, or a higher average of good responses is sometimes better than just always having the quickest response.
All right, well, I guess I don't have to talk because that's kind of where I was going for your side of the debate, But yeah, like we've said, like it's hard to determine like who's 100% in the right,
Impossible.
who's
Yeah.
100% in the wrong. It's very situational based. It's also very hero based. Like, do we trust Captain America? I'd say most of us do, but do we trust the Punisher? Probably not as much,
Right.
Like how do we differentiate where our trust goes? So there's a lot of factors that go into right and wrong here, and we don't necessarily have to make this decision in real life.
It's all about intent. You know what I'm saying? The Avengers' intent is to protect the world and the people, whereas the Punisher's intent is to punish. It's like, and it's like,
although Captain America and the Punisher probably kill like the same amount of people, Captain America just does a lot of it overseas.
He does it for the greater good.
Not out of revenge. I just kicked that guy's spine out of his back for justice.
For America. All right. Do either of you have any closing thoughts? Or do you have anything to say about the opposing ideal?
Yeah, I was going to just close out saying that I thought that you made a really good case. I think that the moralistic approach is what I took on our should heroes kill debate. And so I definitely see like the value of that side. That's what I love in my heroes. That's what I love in Captain America. So from like a viewer standpoint, I really respect the points that you made, and I respect Captain America's decision, like from an idealistic philosophical viewer's point of view. But then like getting down to the nitty gritty, like when I watched that movie, I feel like I still just overall agreed with Iron Man. And especially in the aspect that Iron Man was trying to like keep the Beatles together. Like Iron Man's like, let's stay a team and try and work this out. And Cap was like out the door so fast. To be granted, he had a funeral to go to.
I think for me, definitely I see the good of checks and balances. I think that checks and balances are like a great idea. It's just hard for me to figure that it's the best idea for the Avengers, you know what I'm saying? Or superheroes in general. Like,
they're above the law.
it just like, it feels like
nature.
it couldn't really work if that's how it was operating, You can't, Batman has to get approval to go and fight the Joker, like, that's what the police are for. Batman's there for when, and the Avengers are there for when the law stops, And
I guess that all depends on like how much the UN like dictates the level of like limitations, like is the UN there to dictate the limitations overseas and traveling from country to country, or is it there to dictate like the laws and how things go on in New York City? Or can New York City or that country itself have its own version of laws that the superheroes work within? And maybe those laws aren't as limiting as maybe we're thinking the UN's version of the Sokovia Accords are.
We just know that the UN has some level of involvement in the Avengers operation that Captain America does not like and thinks is too much.
Right. So maybe the UN is just when it comes to global threats or comes from an American citizen going over into another country, without permission to be there. So maybe that's what the UN was dictating. But then within the own country, like that's up to how they want to run their country and what their citizens can do, but as soon as you cross those lines, then it becomes a world affair. And that's where I think we need to have those limitations in place to make sure that we're not going and doing stuff that people over here don't want us to go and do. Like in The Incredibles, when that guy jumped off the building, he's like, I didn't want to be saved.
Right.
Like
Bon voyage.
yeah.
I love that. I love that scene. Incredible. I'm not affiliated with him.
I don't know how it works in the real world, but one thing that you were kind of just saying that kind of sparked the idea in my head is like the FBI, from my understanding of how the FBI works, is they have to be invited
to work on foreign soil.
But, well, even, I don't know, like I said, I don't know how it works, but from my assumption is like a state can invite the FBI in to help them.
Yeah.
But also the FBI sometimes can say we're taking over. So maybe the Avengers should operate like that. If there's something going on in a foreign country, the country can request help from the Avengers. But sometimes when Thanos invades, the Avengers can say, well, hey, we're coming in.
Yeah, I think that the important thing in this debate is, from my perspective, is kind of the right to choose. Like, if you are a foreign country and the Avengers decide to just come in and they're like, plow through your city, destroy a train, and then they're like, we saved you, you're welcome. And then you're like upset with it. You have your right to be upset with it.
Destroyed my whole house.
But granted, they're trying to do what's right and they're trying to do what's good. But if you are sick and somebody says, hey, like, this medicine is good for you, and you're like, I don't trust that medicine, I don't want it in my body, and they're like, you'll die if you don't take it, and you're like, no, I don't want that medicine, and then they just force it down your throat, like, that's kind of what the Avengers are doing by saying, like, we're doing what's best for you whether you want us here or not. I mean,
good comparison.
Right to choose,
Yeah.
These countries should have the right to choose, even if it's the wrong choice.
I can get down with that. Like I said, they have to request the help, but in some instances,
Basically, what I'm getting from this conversation is that we should be in charge.
yeah, put me in charge.
We'll figure it out. Like,
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
we're all kind of on common ground now. We figured it out in an hour and a half. That's pretty quick.
Doctor? Doctor?
All three of us worked for government, and we know how slow things can move. So
Yes, and how they might not make the best decision for
most
everyone,
of the time, they
if
don't
not
make the best
anyone
decision.
involved except themselves.
They try to move fast in emergencies, in like disaster relief, they try to move fast.
I would agree there.
Yeah.
But in the day-to-day stuff,
But I think
Slow moving.
This is definitely been one of my favorite debates, and this has been one we've talked about kind of like, I think, since the inception of the podcast. Like, very early on, we started talking about this idea. So I'm excited that we finally got around to it. I think I got to get to all of my quotes. I watching that clip, I was like, this scene holds everything. Holds every
It really does.
point of the debate.
I mean, that scene is.
it's a very
excellent.
thorough scene. Yeah.
Yeah.
And something that you guys mentioned in the very beginning is like each person contributed to the conversation.
Yeah.
No one was there just
Yeah.
observing.
Oh my gosh. And I just noticed they're back to back, but this Black Widow quote that I missed too. As I said, I think I got to say all my points. She has a really good line that I want to get in before we close. She says, if we have one hand on the wheel, we can still steer. If we're still involved, if we still have a voice, it's like that's what the Sokovia Accords are. I see as Cap doesn't want another hand on the wheel, he doesn't want regulations, but she's saying, like, if we have a say, that's better than being outlaws. And even though Black Widow changes sides later in the movie, I think these are that her points at the end of this argument are the best points. One hand on the wheel, still steer, still have a value.
Yeah, that is a good point. I wish.
I feel like she changes sides just to mitigate the damage within the team.
Yeah, I wish I was gonna. That's what I was gonna say. Is I wish they kind of explored why she changed sides a little bit more, because, from my memory, we don't really get the answer to why she changed sides. Was it the
more of,
long
like,
game?
the compassion for Captain America and like Bucky and them trying to
Yeah.
do what they thought was right. She still trusts Cap's judgment, I think, even though she thinks that having one hand on the steering wheel is the best decision for the whole team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's kind of starting to see, because he's saying in that movie that something else is going on. He's like, hey, this aside, like, Cap kind of has an idea that of Zemo's involvement and somebody planning, and I think that he's starting to see that because of Bucky being framed. So I think that's what she's seeing, is like, oh, something's going down. Like, this Sokovia Accord stuff aside, like, maybe that's what she's saying.
She too is like the movie before that, the Captain America movie before that's Winter Soldier, which is, Black Widow and Captain America like team up for a good portion of that movie. She's got to spend like one-on-one time with Captain America and see how he operates, and knows that his heart is always in the right place.
She has a moral arc in that story too, because she goes from her beginning of just like stealing that information, doing Shield's dirty work behind Cap's back at the end, to kind of like realizing the corruption and denouncing, what she's worked towards.
We also didn't talk at all about Black Panther seeking revenge for his father's death, trying to kill Bucky. You know, like he was going to kill Bucky, whether Bucky was going to be like, hey, I'll go with you, due process, or whether he was going to fight back or not. And I think that's the potential of like, oh shoot, that's scary. Like these guys can flip the switch at any point and decide like this is best for them, you know?
Yeah.
And
Even
that's not even a scenario that it's best for everyone. Like that's a scenario where it's purely based off revenge. And he's one of the most powerful people in the world, both financially and physically.
Politically, because of the size of his country. And the same argument could even be made against the proprietor of my argument, Iron Man, by the end of this movie, because he literally just turns rogue, like trying to kill Bucky. I mean, I think his argument from earlier on still stands, but him trying to, at this point, turning around and trying to kill Bucky is just an example of how if he decides somebody deserves to die, like it's going to be pretty tough to stop him, because he's got, you know, the capability to create an arsenal of world-destroying suits.
Like these checks and balances can't stop everything, can't prevent everything. But the hope would be that it helps protect or predict things that were going to happen in the future, you know?
I think everybody's got to say their piece.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, definitely,
been a long
definitely
one.
a fun argument. Like,
I need a nap. And a snack.
snack for
This
sure.
one took it out of me. I wasn't even doing most of the arguing.
Aaron, it's a snacky time.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. It's crazy to think that we're on episode 83 here. Like, we're almost to 100. We got to do something cool for our 100th episode.
I'm quitting after episode 99.
But this is all possible because of the 3 people that watch this podcast. So thank you so much.
We love you.
You're welcome.
Yes. The 3 people being us.
It ain't much, but it's honest work.
I watch every episode.
But yeah,
except for the spoiler ones. For me.
We post every Monday and Thursday, full episodes on YouTube and Spotify, and then we post clips from our YouTube on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So interact with us in the comments, but definitely make sure you go over to those websites and hit subscribe, follow, and the notification bell so you can see when we post.
And
That's a wrap.